I expect at least some royalties, okay?
Sounds good.
I'm kidding, of course. And also maybe Emily should just lead this class because this talk, because you win the 3-minute thesis competition. I've been a part of that as a judge, if you will. So I know what that's about, and that's really great. In fact, that's about as apropos as you can be for this discussion. So anyway, y'all feel free to just jump in whenever you want. This is not meant to be a lecture or whatever. I'm not going to torture you all with the slideshow or anything. So let's just call it a conversation. We'll go from there. Just quickly, just to kind of fill in up a little bit of blanks. I've been at the university for nearly a decade, believe it or not, for me at least. And essentially what I do is I write about the sciences at the university. And what that means is I'm essentially trying to find folks who have something that would be quote unquote newsworthy, whether it's a published result or research in action or profiles or whatever it might be. Essentially what I'm trying to do is gain more awareness about the scientific and the research enterprise at the university. And obviously, since I'm being paid, my paycheck says University of Iowa on it. Clearly, I'm about advancing and promoting the institution, right? But I'd like to think the way I do it, though, is not a marketing kind of effort. It's more about talking about or reporting on, if you will, producing stories about stuff that is legitimate. In other words, I was a science journalist for a long time with the Associated Press, among other outlets, if you will. And I try to produce my stories in the same way that I would if I were still a reporter, if that makes sense, if I were still in the media. And so the way I approach my craft is almost the same, except with one major caveat, and that's, of course, I'm not courting any controversy or anything like that. I'm being faithful to the research and clearly asking questions that try to elicit more information and to keep it factually based. But obviously, at the end of the day, I am working for the university, if that makes sense. So let's talk about yourselves. Y'all are all graduate students, I'm assuming. Is that correct? So you're firmly in what I would call the bubble, maybe even more than faculty are. And what I mean by that is there's a very good chance that when you all talk about what you do in terms of your research, if you will, or what you're studying, if it's going to be with your peers, with other graduate students primarily. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very important audience, right? But let's talk about when you are trying to speak with people who are not your peers. So that's where you need to kind of think about getting out of the bubble, and your message changes when you're not in the bubble. Okay. What I mean by that is when you're speaking to non-peers, non-scientists, your message must change. If it doesn't, I guarantee you're doing yourself a disservice, and your message will be relatively poorly articulated and poorly understood. So let's talk about that. All right. So you need to know your audience. Okay. First of all, that's incredibly important. Know whom you are addressing and change your message accordingly. Okay. And we'll talk about your message. All right. So but before we do that with the audience, so your audience can be all sorts of different types, right? It could be, I think Emily mentioned her grandmother or something like that, like, in terms of practicing. Okay. That's an audience, right? I would call that the general public. Okay. It could be school children, elementary school children, middle school children, high school, young adults. And even with those three that I just named, the message changes, right? You're not going to be able to talk to high schoolers elementary school children the way you would high schoolers. At least I would argue submit that you would not be able to. It would be way over their heads if you tried to just, copy and paste the same presentation or something like that, or whatever you're talking about. A donor, a potential prospective donor, your message should be different for that person than even for the general public. Okay. Why? Because you're trying to get that person to give you money. So your message needs to be tailored for that objective. So when you think about audience, you think about how your message changes depending on the audience. But audience is critical. Okay. So now that I've pounded that into y'all's brains, let's talk about the message. Okay. Well, even as graduate students, and I don't mean that in any way, in any like pejorative way. You all are just starting your scientific journey, let's just say, okay? Even though you are just starting your scientific journey, you have a story, and your story is your research. Even if it is in the relatively embryonic stages, let's say, or if you don't know exactly what you might be doing when as you continue your journey to be, get your master's or doctorate or whatever it may be in whatever scientific discipline it may be. You do your research, what you're doing is your story. Okay, does that make sense so far? So let's talk about a little bit about how you work on your story. Okay, again, your story is your research. At least that's what I would argue, at least for now, right? Okay, I mean, and so how do you create a narrative based on your research? What I think the most important thing to do is create a kernel. Okay, so imagine, I know that most of us probably shop online nowadays, so you're going to have to help me with this example. I'm going to go back probably before you were born in terms of like what it's like to shop. Okay, but if you're walking down Main Street, USA, and you see a store, right, a store window. Now, if you're a smart business owner, or a proprietor of a given store on Main Street, USA, do you fill your front window with everything in your store? Yes or no? Absolutely not. You would just clutter everything, and the more stuff that's there, the harder it is for anyone to get a really good idea what you really have. So a smart store owner is going to put out a few of the gems, if you will, or some things to try to entice you to enter the store. Then once you're in there, you see all the goodies all over the shelves. Okay, you see a lot more there. Okay, your narrative should kind of follow that general rule of thumb. You start with a kernel. Okay, you want to get to the bare bones of what you do and why it's important. Okay, I like to ask a very crass question. I did this when I was a journalist. I try not to do it nowadays as much with faculty because they're faculty, so we don't want to bruise their egos and stuff. Okay, do not share that with faculty, by the way, Riley. Okay. But what I mean by that is, when I was a journalist, I always asked, and I didn't ask this like brazenly, but I always thought to myself, why should I care? Okay, because when I was in the media, basically I'm writing for the general public, okay, or producing stories that I want to be as widely read as possible. Okay, so I need to put myself in the shoes of the general public, if you will. And if you can't make me care about it, or can't articulate the message to make me care about it, then chances are other people aren't going to care about it either. Does that make sense a little bit? So you've got to really get in, you really got to think about what your research is about and why it's important, not to your peers, but to public or to audiences outside of the scientific bubble, if that makes sense. Okay. A couple of ways to do that is you want to simplify. Okay, you want to try to have maybe 2 or 3 sentences that it can explain or encapsulate what you do, and is in as simple language as possible. So that means jettisoning the jargon. Okay, here's a great example that I always like to trot out: megafauna. All right, y'all probably know what megafauna is, right? Multi-syllabic word, big SAT word, right? Back in the day, I'm sure. All right. Why do people say megafauna? Why? Large animals. Thank you very much. Can we move on now? You know what I mean? Don't use those words to non-scientific audiences. All you do is confuse them. And actually, to be honest with you, it sounds really haughty and arrogant. Okay. Keep it simple. All right. Jettison the jargon. It's hard to do this, all right? But when you work on your kernel, those 2 to 3 sentences encapsulate what you do. Try very hard to use simple sentence structures and simple words, okay? Once you accomplish that, and it is a pain in the you-know-what to do it, but it can be done. And I'll show you a couple of examples of faculty who have done this with my input and others in a summer workshop that we hold for faculty every year. Also, you want to explain why your research is important, okay? So that's another step in this, okay? What you do, why is it important? Therefore, answering the question, why should someone care, okay? Then you can then kind of get a little aspirational then, if you're trying to think about the scaffolding here for your kernel, okay? What do you hope to achieve, or what do you hope that what you do will achieve? What's the goal here? A lot of research is about answering questions, right? Hypotheses. But it could be that the end of the road is a long way away, right? Because science is all about, in most of the time, science is about increments. It's like a football game where you're just running into the line, gaining a few yards, lining up and doing the same doggone thing again and again and again. But eventually you hit pay dirt, one could hope, or that's the goal, right? To score the touchdown, okay? To use a bad football metaphor, okay? So think about the aspirational aspects as well. So what is the end goal? And why do you want to do that? Even if it's not going to happen like next year or even the year after that or whatever, because you want to have hope, right? You want to evoke that sense of hope and promise, okay? Especially when it comes to people who may be wanting to give you money, all right? You definitely don't just want to say, this is what I'm doing, and that's it, because it lacks context, okay? You got to have the context, and you've got to have the goal, the aspiration, the promise, the aspiration, okay? Think about grant awards. So I'm sure you all are familiar at least with the grant award process. Well, what the heck is a grant award? When some funding agency gives you money, what are they banking on? They're banking on a promise, essentially, right? You're saying, with this money, I'm going to try to do X, Y, and Z and achieve A, B, or C, or whatever. You get my point? It is the beginning of the road, okay? And the road starts to end when you start to get results, and then you publish them in peer-reviewed journals, et cetera, right? And that's when you start moving that ball down the field, again, to go back to that bad football metaphor, okay? So don't forget about the aspirational aspects. So what is your research about? Why is it important? And then what do you hope to achieve or accomplish whenever that may be, okay? And then maybe a little bit about how you do it, but be careful with that, all right? I love reading manuscripts. First of all, because I feel like I'm hacking my way through like a jungle of just unbelievable amount of jargon and other stuff, okay? And if you ever, you're in your discipline, okay? So you know the words in your particular field. Good for you, all right? So you can probably pick up Journal X or Journal Y and sift through the manuscripts, read the abstracts, all that jazz, and probably have a pretty good idea about different papers, okay? But I challenge you to go to a journal outside of your field and try to read those manuscripts, and you tell me if you can understand them, all right? Even 50%, all right? Well, that is the challenge that comes, in terms of that, and with manuscripts, and also when you read a lot of the manuscripts, probably half of it, if not more, is devoted to what I call what is called materials and methods, okay? I get it. Science is an exact thing in many respects. You have to have every T crossed, every I dotted. You've got to talk about every single beaker that you use and who manufactured it, and the reactant here and the reagent here and there and all that stuff. I get it. Trust me, no one outside of your field cares, okay? So whatever you do, do not have your little script talk about materials and methods unless you are using something that's really fundamentally interesting or novel, okay? So if you're using some kind of newfangled mass spectrometer or something, that's fine, but don't fixate or focus what you're talking about on the materials and methods, okay? It is an additional element, but it should not be the central focus of your narrative unless truly what you're working on or the equipment you're using is the story, okay? Most likely it isn't. It's possible that it is. So I don't want to dismiss that out of hand, but I just want to kind of just get you all thinking about that. So you've really, when you look at a manuscript, it's pretty formulaic across the disciplines. All right. It's your it's your abstract, obviously, but let's shelve that for a second. Okay. It's your introduction, your materials and methods, your results, your discussion, and your conclusion. Would anyone like to tell me what's the shortest part of a typical manuscript? Which section? Come on, y'all know.
Conclusion.
You've read enough manuscripts. Which section of those 5, I think it was 5, is usually the shortest?
Conclusion.
Thank you. Exactly. Ding, ding, ding. That's why I won the 3-minute thesis competition. That's exactly right. It's almost as if the scientists writing the paper ran out of gas and like, blah, 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 this is it. And they're done. Well, let me tell you, you flip that completely on its head when you talk to non-scientific audiences. You start with the conclusion, okay? That's what's important. All right, that is like the encapsulation of what you achieved in that particular paper, or whatever you've been doing that led to the writing of the paper. Okay, all right, that is important. That is the narrative. Okay, but everyone's got, and the manuscripts are flipped upside down when it comes to the non-scientific audiences. Okay, so think about that. Just keep that in mind. Your introduction is the context. Okay. And context is good. Again, if you're thinking about how you would write or how you would talk about what you do, that context is not the main part, just like the materials and methods is not the main part of your narrative, okay? But context is important. It helps to couch it or to frame your message, if that makes sense, everybody, okay? So that's kind of what I wanted to get at. It's, you know, it's hard for me to talk about particular research because I don't know what y'all are engaged in. But if you can kind of keep these kind of, I don't know, we call them tips, if you will, whatever you want to call them, in mind, that I think I would like to think that would be helpful to you all. So again, the audience whom you are addressing is super important. Okay, you've got to know your audience and tailor your message accordingly. One narrative does not fit all. One size does not fit all. In fact, it's a different narrative for each audience, one could argue, okay? Your story is your research, okay? Your research is about describing very briefly and simply what you do. Then, why is it important? Then, what do you hope to achieve? Sprinkle in a little bit of context, okay? What's the background, if you will, so to speak, right? That introduction that you see in a lot of peer-reviewed manuscripts, okay? Maybe a little bit about the technique or technology or whatever it is that you use to do that research, but keep that at a minimum. In other words, again, to go back to Main Street USA, your front window should not be cluttered. It should be very streamlined, very elegant, very simple. Then you can then add to your narrative. So you have that kernel, as I talked about, right? Then you can start to add to it. You can add other things, okay? You can add more context. You can talk more about the techniques you use. You can talk about, you know, some of the other, you know, different types of research that maybe you're involved in, because you may not be involved in one particular project, right? You may have other projects. I would argue that if you have several or more than one, let's say, you know, research or line of, you know, research line, if you will, maybe pick one that you think is the most interesting and kind of use that as your central example. And then you can add the other lines of research or the other research pursuits into that. Does that make sense? But don't try to throw everything into the pot of soup, so to speak. Okay. Does that make a little bit of sense in terms of what I'm talking about? And let me describe just really briefly, because we're hitting the half hour and I want to make sure y'all have plenty of time to ask questions. I also got a few little show and tell things. If I, once Riley can, if you shared a screen, I'll pop over to it. We can watch a couple of videos of faculty talking about what they do, so you get an idea what I'm talking about. Why is this important? Why should you even engage in this, other than the fact that you good people are in connecting science and society? You actually are interested in communicating science. And I just want to applaud you for that. And I probably should have preambled that by saying, congratulations. I'm glad that you all are even interested in this, because it is critical. All right. It's just critical that people such as yourselves who are involved in a field that can be inscrutable or poorly understood by many, that you are willing to take the time to try to describe it to folks. And I hope you all have great careers where then what you do is eminently interesting and explained to people beyond your peers. So why is it important to actually go through this exercise? First of all, it's money, as we talked about. You need money to survive, right? And faculty, I say this to faculty every single time. They're basically your research. You should think about it as a business. And I tell faculty this: think about your research, I mean little, but your research enterprise, if you will, small as it may be at this point in time in your careers. All right. It is a business. All right. Your lab, if you look at your faculty mentor, that person's lab is a business, whether that person thinks about it that way or not. And for a business to succeed, I'd argue it needs 4 principal things. You need money. Okay. You ain't going anywhere without money. All right. So you need the money. You need people. All right. So you need to be able to communicate effectively what you're doing if you want to get the best talent. Okay. All right. And you need to be out there, preferably on search page 1, right? When someone Googles, a particular field or whatever. Okay. Thirdly is you need partnerships. You want to work with people. You want to collaborate with people to answer some of those bigger questions that, that society is begging for answers. Okay. That's where the big money is too, by the way. We all know that. Cross-disciplinary research, blah, 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 right? That's what all the funding agencies, NSF, NIH, DOE's Office of Science, they're all into this interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary stuff. Why are they interested in that? Because they're trying to put the money where the big questions are, okay? So you need those partners. How do people find out about you? Well, they're sure as crap not going to be reading all these manuscripts that are out there, the 25,000, 30,000 and counting, maybe more, tens of thousands of journals out there. Give me a break, right? No one, and I mean no one, has time to follow all that, okay? So you got to figure out how to get your name, if you will, your business out there. That's beyond simply getting citations, from, and for your published research, okay? Does that make sense a little bit? And that again comes back to communicating what you do and communicating it effectively. The fourth one, and maybe the one that maybe is the hardest to perhaps to understand, is your business needs a brand, okay? And communicating what you do is a way of promoting your brand. And there's nothing wrong with promoting yourself as long as you do it smartly, okay? Does that make sense what I'm saying? But you have a brand. You really do. And you should think about it that way, because you are a business. You are a business enterprise, a burgeoning one perhaps, but you are one. And as you progress in your careers, that will become even more and more apparent, I'd like to think. So let me wrap it up there for a moment. Let me show you something. Am I good now?
Yeah, you should be co-host, so hopefully you can share your
All
screen.
right, hold on a second. Let me find this. Can y'all see this on my screen?
Not
or just
yet.
me right now? Can you see me or something called faculty script tips?
Just you at the moment.
Okay. Oh, there we go. My bad. Sorry about that, folks.
There we go. Now we're good.
Can y'all see that all right?
Yeah.
So this is not rocket science here, okay, folks? As you can see, this is something I scribbled on a blackboard with the faculty communications workshop. And what this is, and I'll be very brief about it because it's something that's, it is a workshop that's organized by the Office of Vice President for Research. And this is something that folks there, myself, and folks in the School of Journalism and Mass Communications kind of dreamt this up, all right, 9 years ago. And we invite 9 or 10 faculty to basically spend a day with us to learn about how to communicate what they do. Some of which I've been babbling about for the last half hour, okay? At the end, they write a script, okay? They do exactly what we were just talking about. They craft a narrative, okay? And that's their deliverable, is to create that script, write that script, and then there's a video, or they go into a studio, like a TV studio, and they articulate their script to the camera, that then is their deliverable that they can use however they wish. Does that make sense what I'm saying so far? So here I am ambling into a classroom. The faculty look very confused, which is kind of funny to see sometimes, because, you know, faculty, I mean, they're super smart, right? They all got the doctorates, come on. But this is how we try to help them organize their thoughts so they can produce what I like to think are pretty good scripts. And I'll show you a couple of examples in a second. You can be the judge, all right? Forget about that fourth one. Obviously, there's a grammatical error there, just, you know, but I had a what there and then I threw in how, so I didn't, anyway, but you get the point, right? And it's a lot of what I just talked about. So that's pretty much it right there. If you can do that, that's a good 60, 70 seconds right there. And that's what you should be aiming for, by the way, in your quote unquote script, okay? And you can tape yourself, record yourself articulating it, time yourself, and see where you're at. But you don't want to be droning on for like a couple of minutes or longer. The reason is because, as we all know, people's attention spans are very brief, especially if you're talking to elementary school children. Oh my gosh. So anyway, you get my point. Even a donor, man, you know, if you catch a donor in an elevator, that person's going to give you 60 seconds probably, and that's about it. Okay. So you've got to think about that. And I'm not trying to put pressure on you all, and you don't need to engage in this, but I assure you that if you do engage in this and try to put this together, it will benefit you. All right. Does that make sense so far? All right. Let me see. Let me go. Can I? So I guess, do I need to stop sharing and then go back? Right. Let me try. Okay. Bear with me, folks. All right. Here we go. So let's watch a video. Okay. This is Ebony Johnson, faculty, obviously, right? And she's going to talk about her research, and you can listen and see what you think. Okay. Good. All right. Let's do it.
So I think you may need to share the sound with it as well.
Oh,
I think that's
all right. How do I do that?
up.
Sorry about that, folks.
I believe when you, I believe if you exit out of your sharing and then share again, there's a
okay.
Sorry, a little folks. Button on the bottom left that says share sound.
See it. Got it. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh, let me try that again. All right. Sorry, folks. All right, now I should be good. All right, let me try that again. All right.
My name is Ebony Johnson, and I study persons living with chronic illness and disability. I also study populations at risk of developing chronic illness and disability, particularly racial and ethnic minority groups. One project I'm currently working on looks at African American women living with HIV while also managing 2 or more other physical and psychological health conditions. Oftentimes, research looks at managing 1 or sometimes 2 chronic health conditions, but fails to look at the complexities of managing multiple chronic health conditions simultaneously. My research helps women tell their stories so that we can address the unique challenges of managing those chronic health conditions simultaneously to better improve their health and quality of life outcomes.
All right. Did you all understand what her research is about? Pretty freaking crystal clear, right? I think. Did you hear any big words that were difficult to understand? Absolutely not. The jargon was completely thrown out. Good for her, right? She talked about a project that she's involved in. That was, you know, she picked one. I'm sure she has multiple types of lines of research, if you will, or pursuits, whatever you want to call it. She picked one. She concentrated on that one. She had an aspirational thing, right? She talked about why it's important, et cetera, et cetera. And that, my friends, was about 60 odd seconds right there, okay? Then again, as I talked about with the whole front store window kind of Main Street USA thing, you can always add more, okay? But get the kernel first, and then you can start to adorn it, okay? Does that make sense? Let's watch one more, and then and that will get us about 40 after. And then if you all want to ask questions or if you want to watch more, that's fine. I'm open to whatever y'all want to do. Is that fair?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, cool. Let's try this again. All right. All right. As I try to conquer this, folks, bear with me. There we go. Let's see here. This guy right here. All right, let's do it.
I'm an environmental engineer who studies how non-point pollutants change in the environment and the implications for ecosystems and human health. And what non-point pollutants are those that don't come out at the end of a pipe. These are things that rather run off of our streets and parking lots and lawns and farm fields and are largely untreated. The reason why it's important to study how pollutants transform and or change in the environment is because their chemical structure can make them either more or less toxic to fish in the environment or to our drinking water sources. And ultimately what we're trying to do by our studies in the laboratory and in our field-based research is to better design so-called engineered natural treatment systems that harness the power of bacteria and plants and fungi to sustainably capture and degrade pollutants. This will, in the end, be able to improve the quality of our water resources and also protect our drinking water sources.
All right. Did y'all understand what Greg was talking about there? I gotta say, I thought he did a really good job with that because he could have easily really dived into jargon and never come up for air. So one thing he did was he mentioned non-point source or non-point pollutants. No one understands what that is, okay? But it's critical to what his research is about. And so in this example, he defined it right there. There's nothing wrong with that. So he did do it. He used some jargon there, but in this case, it's central to his narrative. There's no really good way to get around that. So he immediately defined it very simply. So you're not sitting there, like grinding your teeth and having your brain like do mental calisthenics, trying to understand what that is. So that was really important. Second thing, he didn't mention like aquatic organisms or some crazy, language. He said fish. Yeah, there are other organisms in the water, but you don't have to list them all, okay? And you don't have to use a big freaking, big words to describe that. He said fish. Everybody understands the word fish. Not everybody. You cannot assume that everybody understands aquatic organisms, okay? Or whatever. Does that make sense? I'm saying, or aquatic biota, even worse, okay? Lastly, I thought what was really good about what he did, and I haven't watched this in a long time. I think he came through the shop maybe like 3 years ago, okay? Is he said ultimately, comma, all right, I'm inserting the comma, but you get my point. Ultimately, blah, 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 blah. What is that? What part of what we talked about is that right there, folks? So the letter A, 4 syllables. My kid just says fish in the background. No, wrong. Come on, what are we talking about? Another word for hope, hopeful. No, not abstract. What is it?
Aspiration.
Thank you. There. Ultimately, comma, what I hope to do or whatever he said. That is aspirational. That makes you feel doggone good about the future, right? Like this guy is going to kick some ass, all right, and do something good for the world, for the planet, okay? That's a good thing. It's an easy way to do it. Ultimately, blah, 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 right? Hey, folks, kids, can you get the door? Someone's at the door. All right, you got me? So it does. He did a great job with his script. It was 79 seconds. So, but it kept you engaged, all right? So it's cool. It's fewer than 80 seconds. I can deal with that, okay? Preferably a little shorter, but it's good, okay? And he explained what he did very simply. And he got to all the main points that he wanted to. Does that make sense what I'm saying? All right. So I'm my little part of this whole song and dance is I'm going to conclude. If y'all have any questions, besides my children dancing in the background, whatever, feel free to ask them. All right.
Well,
Well,
I
thanks
just,
so much. I'm gonna just stop recording here just so we get into the
That's
questions. and
fine.
Be more
Can
candid.
you